stuff. So welcome, Jeff. Jeff Gothelf. He's a writer doing coaching, consulting, training, keynotes around the world. It's been a couple of times in Denmark, I think.
Oh yeah.
I met Jeff at the Agile conference at the Teknologisk Institut some years ago, where you did the keynote and I did a talk just afterwards. Jeff has been writing 4 books. I think the number 4 is coming out now.
Correct.
And
yes.
Maybe this is even more relevant for most people with this forever employable and quite interesting, also related to the situation we are in right now. Jeff will do a presentation, and then during the presentation, you can write questions in the Q&A module. And I also have enabled some functionality where you can upvote. There's a hand, and you can vote on questions you think is great. And you're going to actually also vote on your own question. And after the presentation, we'll do a Q&A where we'll start with the questions from the top with the most votes. You can also comment on questions. And so we're going to have the presentation and then followed by a Q&A. So please welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much for having me. This is fantastic. And one of the things that I was actively doing here before starting is I wanted to, this presentation is going to be about my new book. And I just wanted to make sure that we had a good link for a form. I'd like to give away a couple of copies of the book a little bit later, and there's a form that might be helpful with that. And so one thing I did, and sorry it took me a second to get there, but I'm going to put this in the chat as well here, that if you go to this form and you fill it out, we're going to do a drawing for 2 free copies of the book once I actually have the book printed, which will be very exciting. So you can go there and fill that out. I'm going to share my screen and kind of give a talk for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then I'm going to kind of open up for Q&A as we just discussed as well. So I'm assuming you can see my screen and all as well at this point. The conversation I want to have with you today is called Forever Employable, and its focus is on ensuring that our career stays as agile as our work. Now, this may sound like an interesting or perhaps a different kind of topic than we typically talk about in these meetups and in these circles and in these events. And I think you're right. I think it is different. And I think that we don't talk about it enough. I think also what you'll find as I go through the presentation is that many of the ideas, many of the concepts, many of the methodologies, the philosophies that we talk about with Agile, with Scrum, are the same when you start to apply them to yourself, if you'd like to start to build some kind of a forever employable aspect to your career and your professional development. Let me tell you the story and see what you think, and then we'll do some Q&A. So this is me in the mid-2000s. This is me and my daughters. My daughters today are a lot bigger than this, but in the mid-2000s, they were this small. And at this point in my life, we're talking about the year is 2006, 2007. Things are going pretty good. I'm married. I'm still married, by the way, the same person. I've got my kids. I've got a house. I live outside of New York City in New Jersey, 2 cars, you know, the American dream. Everything is going great at that point. And then one morning, on the morning of my 35th birthday, on the day I turned 35, I woke up in a panic. I woke up in a cold sweat and in a panic. And I was very, very, very worried about my future. I was very worried that in 5 years, when I turned 40, I would become unemployable. And I wouldn't be able to continue to provide for my growing family and, you know, the house, the cars, all of that kind of stuff. And look, up until that point, I had a pretty good run. Things had gone pretty well. I started off as a broke musician. I used to play in bands for a long time, traveling around and not making any money, but having kind of the best time of my life with these guys. And then when I got tired of being broke, the internet happened, which was great. I was in bands in the 90s, you know, and then the internet happened in the late 90s, which was pretty amazing, right? And for me, as someone who was always computer literate and savvy, I gravitated very quickly towards the internet. And back in 1999, when I got my first job, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job. And so I could do a little bit more than spell it. And in 1999, I got a job at a company called IXL as a designer and a front-end developer. In other words, I wrote markup, I wrote HTML, not exactly doing development work, but that's what it was called back then. Very quickly after that, I was introduced to this book. This book is called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And this book changed my life because it made me realize that what I really wanted to do was to be at the beginning of the software development process. And information architecture, kind of a bit of a precursor to interaction design and user experience design, seemed to move me a few steps further upstream in the waterfall, right? As a developer and a designer, and it was waterfall, let's be honest, right? I was at the end. I got all the requirements, I built it, and then we shipped it, right? This moved me up a few steps, and this took my career seemingly in a new direction. Further upstream, I got to do more kind of design and strategy and thinking about that kind of stuff. And things were going great until the dot-com bubble burst, right? All of a sudden, I've got all these plans and all these ambitions, and then everything bursts and all the valuations drop and all the jobs disappear. And I bounce around a bunch. I bounce around, I do a few jobs here and there. I keep, struggling to keep a job while the dot-com bubble was in full effect, bursting. But I worked at AOL for a while, designing software. I ended up managing a team at a company called Web Trends in Portland, Oregon for a while. And then I came back to New York in the mid-2000s, around 2007, 2008, to become the director of user experience at a company called The Ladders. And as I said before, right, I'd clawed my way up to the middle. Over the course of about 10 years, I had worked my way up to middle management, which is where I'd gotten. And that's the day that I wake up on my 35th birthday and I'm panicked at this point, right? Because in 5 years, I think, no way am I going to be able to get paid what I need to get paid. No way am I going to have the skill sets that I need to stay relevant. And most importantly, there were all of these young people, these younger, hungrier designers coming up. They were better than me. They were smarter than me. They were, most importantly, they were cheaper than me. And so why not hire them instead of me? And that really woke me up. And the day of my 35th birthday, I made a resolution because I did not want to end up overpaid and unemployable. And the resolution was this. I was no longer going to look for jobs, right? That's great. Instead, jobs were going to look for me. That's the revelation that I made, right? This big resolution on the morning of my 35th birthday. If I continue to chase jobs, like to find the next design management job, the next product management job, right, the next tech gig, this is going to be a never-ending cycle. I need to create a situation where jobs were going to look for me, which I recognize is pretty mind-blowing, right? Wow, mind-blowing, Jeff. That's great, but the year is 2008, and I've got a ton of questions that are unanswered. So what? So I said these words, I had this resolution, but for example, does anyone know who I am, right? If they're looking for a design manager or whatever it is, are they aware that I exist? Why would they come looking for me, right? What problem are they solving that I can help them with? How would they find me? How would I create a situation where I'm easily findable? And then I think most importantly, what kind of work do I want? So if jobs are going to find me, what kind of jobs do I want finding me? And how do I create that situation? And so I spent the next 10 plus years building my platform so that jobs would find me. And I learned a lot over that time. I discovered that there are at least 5 qualities to becoming forever employable, and that there are 5 steps that I took to achieving this. And it all kind of boils down to this, right? You've got to treat your career and your professional development as an agile product development effort. The same concepts, the same ideas that we apply to software development work, to digital products and services, we have to apply to ourselves into our career. And let me show you what I mean by that. I want to illustrate that for you very, very clearly, right? So here are the 5 qualities that I believe you need to become forever employable. So first of all, entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. And if this sounds familiar to you, it should. This is agile, or at the very least, this is agility targeted at yourself. And let me show you kind of how I took each one of these qualities and used it to kind of build the platform that I have. So entrepreneurialism, right? We get the sense that entrepreneurialism are like the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Steve Jobs and the Bezoses of the world. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, right? But it turns out that when you play in bands, bands are like startups, right? And I'm sure all of you have done something in your career or in your personal life that was your very own, your thing, your creative project, your side project, whatever it is, right? There are entrepreneurial skill sets that you can draw on to start to build a platform around yourself to ensure that people start to find you rather than you going looking for them. Self-confidence is really interesting, right? Why should I put myself out there? What stories can I tell? What experience can I draw on to make myself marketable out there on a continuous basis and have people find me? And it's really interesting. It's tough to come out there because it feels like, well, everything's already been said, right? And there's nothing that I could add to the conversation, right? But this really drawing on times in your past where you've had the self-confidence to step forward is absolutely key, because get this, no one has your story, right? There might be 1,000 Scrum Masters in Denmark. Maybe there's 5,000. I don't know, right? But no one became a Scrum Master the same way that you did. You have your story. So draw on that story and the pieces and your unique path to tell that story. There's a part of my story that I've only started talking about in recent years that helps me with my self-confidence and coming out there, which is when I graduated from university, I joined the circus, right? Which was a terrifying decision. I graduated on Saturday and I was in the circus on Monday, right? And I survived 6 months on the road with the circus, which helped me understand that I could kind of throw myself and learn how to throw myself into any situation and learn from it and build on it and use that as a platform to move forward from. So what have you done in the past that's helped you build self-confidence? Use that to start telling your story. Continuous learning is almost a no-brainer at this point. Everything that we do every day should help us get smarter. We should add in activities that help us get smarter, right? Reading, speaking with others, engaging in community like we're doing right now, experimenting, and then using those learnings to build more learnings, right? Like the information architecture book for me was a stepping stone, and I've never stopped learning and continuously getting smarter about the work that I do, the industries that I work in, the world that we live in, all of those types of things. And then ultimately using that learning to improve what you do. You might be very, very good at what you do already, right? But the learnings that you pick up over time should help you improve what you're currently doing. The phrase that I love is a phrase I learned from watching a TED Talk by Astro Teller the phrase is called enthusiastic skepticism. It means that no matter how good I feel I am at something, how can I always get better? And for me, this takes the shape of teaching with other people. So I do a lot of teaching and a lot of training, probably like a lot of you. One of the people that I teach with regularly is Jeff Patton. Jeff Patton and I teach the same stuff, but we come at it from 2 very different perspectives. When we teach together, we learn from each other. I learn how to be a better presenter. I challenge my ideas. He challenges my ideas, and I get better at it. I'm always challenging myself to become a better teacher, a better presenter, right? To learn more about this kind of stuff. And then ultimately, as the world changes, as change continues to move forward, how do you take the things that got you here and reinvent them to help you get there, right? And these are not necessarily the technical skills, but for example, one thing that I'm doing is I'm taking a lot of these ideas around product thinking and I'm applying them to non-product spaces inside organizations, HR, finance, legal, and so forth, right? This is taking the same content and reinventing the value that I add in different spaces, right? So this grows the space that I operate in, and it starts to generate inbound interest from new and different sources. Now, how did I get there? As you take those 5 qualities, right, then you think about the 5 steps. The 5 steps that I took, and these come right out of the book, is this. And I'll go through each one of these: planting a flag, telling your story, following the new path, teaching, and then giving it all away. This is really important. I think planting your flag is the key thing here, right? It's saying, look, I'm going to put my flag down here, and this is the area that I am going to own, right? This is the content space I'm going to be an expert in, or that I'm already an expert in, right? Maybe you're going to focus on a specific type of methodology. Maybe you're going to focus on a specific type of facilitation technique, right? And the people who do this well, do this really well, and they're good inspirational examples, right? I put up the name Eric Ries, right? What is his flag? Well, it's lean startup, right? Jake Knapp put a flag in the ground. He said, look, I'm going to be the design sprint guy. Marty CAGAN is the guru of product management, right? That's his thing. And for me, it was lean UX. It was about solving the agile and UX problem. That's where I planted my flag. And that's where I started having these conversations, because it was a problem that I was trying to solve with my team at the ladders, as you can see in this diagram. And that's where I decided to double down and to start to build a conversation around. So that was number 1. I planted my flag. Step 2, you've got to tell your story, right? The good parts, the bad parts, the ugly parts, to anyone, everywhere, all the time, to anyone who will listen. The goal here is to get good at storytelling so that you can convey your learnings to other people, so then they might be interested in learning from you. 2.5 years after my 35th birthday, I gave my first talk about Agile and UX. 2.5 years. It took a long time to get there, right? This is the first talk I gave about it, and it was about moving from staggered sprints. At the time, it was design ahead of development, right? And then how do we start to, how we at the ladders began to blend those 2 sprints together, right? A month later, I gave the first talk about lean UX in Paris. First time I've ever given a talk outside of the United States, 2.5 years after my 35th birthday, right? And then 3 years later, right? 3 years after my birthday, that kind of awakening moment, I had a big break. And that big break was I wrote the first kind of mass distributed article about lean UX. Smashing Magazine at the time had 1 million readers. These days, they probably have a lot more. And this takes the lean UX conversation global. Every one of these opportunities, I'm telling my story, right? So this leads me to telling my story on stages, different talks here and there, and really in any medium that will work, whether it's Twitter, literally Medium, any channel like LinkedIn, Quora at the time was relevant, Facebook, MailChimp in newsletters, right? All of these were channels that I was using to practice telling my story and to understand how to make it resonate and how to make it valuable for other people. We briefly considered doing Lean UX the musical, but we actually decided not to do Lean UX the musical. I think that was a good call. But pretty much every other channel was open to us in that sense. Now look, why did that story resonate? Why did Lean UX really took off, right? Why did that story resonate? And I've got some thoughts about that. I've got some theories about that. First and foremost, I solved a real problem many people had, just like your products and services, right? I was solving a real problem. I had actual real world experience. I wasn't an academic. I was a practitioner, so I could talk about things we actually did. I was humble about it. I talked about the things that worked as much as I talked about the things that didn't work and what we learned from that. That drives an authenticity and a connection. I always try to give practical, tactical advice. So hopefully when you walk away from this presentation or read anything that I've ever published, there's one thing that you can try. I want to give people something to take away. And all of this builds an authentic connection with your audience, right? So you're practicing telling your story, and you're building that connection. Plant your flag, tell your story. Step 3, follow the new path. As you start to tell these stories, new paths start to emerge, right? New things come your way, right? Things that you will not have predicted, which is the point of all of this, right? Is to start having things find you. One of the interesting dilemmas that I found myself in as I was starting to talk about lean UX was I was doing less and less design work. Now, remember the beginning of the presentation? I was already worried about my design skills when I was 35. Now, I'm out there talking, teaching, writing, speaking about lean UX, doing decreasingly less or increasingly less design work, right? So my skills are atrophying even more, right? And I'm really worried about this because this is what I'm doing. I'm on airplanes, I'm flying around the world, and I'm giving talks, and I'm meeting with teams, and I'm coaching, and I'm consulting. But new paths emerge from this. If the old paths are going to go away, new paths emerge from this. It turns out that book publishers, especially tech book publishers, go to conferences and they look for the latest topics and who's talking about them, right? And so all of a sudden, lean UX is becoming a very popular conversation. Publishers are at these tech conferences, they see me on stage, and they offer me a book deal, which is pretty interesting for me. I'm terrified by the concept, right? I've never written anything more than 750 words, but I'm tapping that entrepreneurial spirit from my music days, and I'm using that self-confidence from my circus days, and I say, great, I'm going to write the lean UX book. Except I had one big problem with that, which was the big secret was that I didn't know how to write a book, right? So the longest thing I'd ever written was like 750 words. And this was the terrifying prospect to write 50,000 words, right? I don't know, it was a mountain to climb. But again, you know, this is preparation for luck, right? I was preparing myself to be lucky. So I was lucky and privileged enough to get that book offer, but I was prepared to take advantage of that opportunity. Now, to be perfectly transparent and humble with you, it took me 2 years to write the Lean UX book. I went through 3 editors, and I wrote that manuscript 4 times. 4 times I wrote it. O'Reilly rejected it the first 3 times. I mean, it was brutal. It was a brutal process. I almost gave up. They almost gave up on me. But for 2 years, I was out there talking about this book that's coming out, this book that's going to, you know, change things. And finally, March 11th, 2013, 5 years after my 35th birthday, after that epiphany, right, of like, I'm not going to look for jobs anymore, I published my first book. And it really does change everything, right? All of a sudden, it amplifies the conversation, and it really kind of pushes me down a path of teaching, consulting, training, speaking, etc. The platform has expanded, right? Now, that leads me to step 4. Step 4 is teaching, and teaching has been the most surprising thing that I love about what I do today. In fact, recently, I had a conversation with Gibson Biddle, the former VP of Netflix and VP of product at Netflix. And he asked me what I like best about my job these days. And I said, I love teaching. Teaching is great. And I teach in all kinds of varieties and formats. And I say yes to almost everything, right? Workshops and conferences and webinars and podcasts and guest articles. All of these are opportunities for you to teach your ideas and to get feedback on your material. This is opportunities to continuously improve and to learn from the market, to improve your storytelling, to understand what's resonating, what jokes work on people, where your examples are outdated, where you need new content, and really kind of moving forward the platform as you start to build it. I'm not going to go into all of these, but I'm going to do a quick deep dive into workshops because I spend a tremendous amount of my time in workshops. And really, again, workshops are a fantastic way to exercise your ideas. And they're a fantastic way for you to improve your storytelling. The nice thing is they also generate revenue, you make money with them, and leads for your other businesses, right? And this creates even more opportunities and new paths. And so that's why I love doing workshops. And just to give you an example of what I mean by this generating more and more new paths, I've been teaching Lean UX workshops forever, for like a decade at this point. And without fail, for years, the feedback was always the same from the people who attended the classes. They said, hey, we love Lean UX, this is great, but my boss won't let me work this way, or my company doesn't work this way. And for me, right, this is a new path. This is a new opportunity that I saw to expand my platform. The insight was that people like Lean UX, but can't get their company to try it, okay? So entrepreneurial spirit says, there's an opportunity here. Can we create a conversation with the bosses? And the hypothesis that I came up with my business partner, co-author, Josh Seiden, is that we can write a business book to create this conversation. And you know what? It took a long time and a lot of effort, but we did it, right? And we opened up another aspect of the platform by publishing Sense and Respond on Harvard Business Review. A far, far different process. I learned a ton, but it helped expand my audience and the platform because of the new paths, right? Finally, step 5, and then we'll wrap this up and do some Q&A. Step 5 is give it all away. And this is the thing that I've learned last, the thing that I've learned, kind of the latest thing I've learned. And it's about giving it all away. And it's unintuitive, right? What I've learned is that the more that you give away for free, the more comes back to you in terms of new opportunities. And so one of the things that I've done over the years, and I've been very, very explicit about, is making my work and myself easily findable and accessible, right? I have a website. Everything I do is on there. My blog posts, my events, my videos, my keynotes, podcasts, guest articles, everything is there. And all of it, with the exception of some of the events that I monetize, is free, right? It's unintuitive, but the more you publish for free, the more people read that stuff and they say, hey, you know what? This is the guy that knows about that thing that we're struggling with. Let's bring him in, right? So again, make yourself accessible and findable. Build your community locally, right? Meetups, local conferences, events at local businesses, friends and organizations. Tremendous opportunity for you to give away your content through speeches and small workshops for free, to tell your story, to build goodwill, and to build that community. And what I've learned over time, like for example, every time I do a paid event in a city, I try to do a free event in the evening as well, right? To give back to the community. And that builds goodwill, and it builds that platform, and it builds that conversation. Now to wrap this up, and then to kind of open this up to discussions, a few things to remember, right? Staying relevant, especially in our field, means staying active. You've got to stay active in conversations. You've got to have a presence in the discussions. You have got to have a presence in the work. You've got to contribute. You've got to participate. You've got to challenge. You've got to be, wherever those conversations are happening, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn or private Slack groups or whatever it is, you want to be part of that conversation on an ongoing basis. And it's a lot of work. I do it a lot, and it's a lot of work. As you start to think about how you'd like to move from one thing to the next, right? As you're thinking about reinvention as one of the qualities, right? Give yourself lots of time to expand your platform. Starting the next thing at least 2 years before you'll need it is a nice, safe buffer. For example, I've been trying to have a conversation with HR people about agile and agility for a long time. I started that a couple of years ago, and I'm starting to get traction with that now, right? How to build not just agility into HR, but how to get HR to support agility across the entire organization. I have no credentials in human resources, right? But I started injecting myself into those conversations a couple of years ago, and now I've got more credibility in that space, right? So that's something that we've done, right? Bringing, again, UX and Agile together is something that we've done with scrum.org. That took time to agree to do, and how to do it, and to build and to test and to launch. And then finally, this is just my path, right? This is one path. This is my path. There are many, many other options for you to take. I just wanted to share with you what worked for me. Take the pieces that work for you and then apply them in your context and see what happens, right? The final thing I'll close with, and I really like this of Bezos quote, is this: as you think about where to focus and where to plant your flag and how to build that platform, I love what Bezos says. People always ask him, what's going to change in 5 to 10 years? And he talks about his focus on the things that will not change in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's where he focuses his energy, right? What's going to stay the same? What are people always going to need? What's always going to be there for folks? And how can you tailor your expertise, your experience, your passion, your content to the things that people will always need, right? Are we still going to be talking about Scrum in 20 years? Maybe, maybe not, right? Are we still going to talk about collaboration, customer centricity, innovation, continuous improvement? Absolutely. We're going to be talking about those things, right? How do we start to focus on the things that are always going to be there, right? And start to build our conversations around that. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for having me and thanks for listening. I'm going to take all your questions for as long as we can. Couple of quick plugs. So the book is available for Kindle pre-order right now. All the information you need is at foreveremployable.com. Print and everything else will be out in about a month, maybe a month and a half or so. Okay. So with that, I'm going to just stop my screen share, drop out of presentation mode here, and then see what kind of questions you have. And again, I want to remind you, again, just of this link. I do want to give away a couple of free copies of the book once I actually have it. And if you go to this form, you know, technically it means Denmark, Forever Employable, April 28th, but I know it doesn't look like that. I had to figure something out. So, Mads, we got questions?
Thank you for a very relevant talk. A great presentation.
Thank you.
And we also started to have some questions coming in, and people are upvoting. So that's great. Actually, I have started to talk with some HR managers related to agile, etc. So this actually resonates with what I'm doing at the moment in different companies.
I think it's super important. Super important.
So we started to have some questions, and maybe you touched a little bit on the first one. It's from Jonas. There's also a follow-up question, but he asked, "How do you find the place to plant your flag?"
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, and I'm working on visualizing this. And so once the book comes out, I'm gonna actually provide some visualizations for this. I think it's a Venn diagram. It's the Venn diagram of at least 3 things, and kind of where that Venn diagram overlaps is where you plant your flag. So number 1, I think that the first circle is your expertise, experience, and passions, right? So professional expertise, yes, it looks exactly like that.
Or maybe,
yeah, more to the sideways, not the vertical one. The vertical one looks a little adult.
A little bit, yeah. Maybe this one is better.
Even better, yes, correct. Nicely done. Yeah. Nicely done there. We're all children in the end on the inside. So the first circle is your experience, expertise, and passion, right? So what are you an expert at? What are you good at? Where's your experience been? And I would also add in your passions, not just your professional. I mean, you can put your professional passion in there as well, but also your personal passions as well, because nothing here says, I mean, look, I built my platform on professional expertise and experience, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? You saw that I'm a piano player, right? And I used to tour in bands, right? I have an unusual amount of knowledge about vintage electric pianos, right? I happen to know a lot about vintage electric pianos, right? Put that in the list, right? Maybe you end up planting your flag, not around something professional, but around something that's your personal passion or whatever it is. But list all that stuff in there. That's the first circle. The second circle is trends. So what's trending culturally? What's trending in technology? What's trending in sociopolitically? What's geopolitically? What's trending in consumer behavior, right? What's trending, I don't know, right? All of these kind of, like, what are kind of the big trends that are happening right now? I would add that in there as well, which I think is absolutely critical to all of this. And then I think the third aspect is to really think through the scope some of this. So there's market sizing. I think that needs to happen there as well. So really thinking through the scope of some of these opportunities, like how big are these specific markets? Like where are people congregating right now? And I think that the overlap of those three things starts to give you some ideas. Now, just because my guess is that you'll end up with more than one opportunity to plant a flag. And this is where that whole build, measure, learn, ship, sense, and respond way of working, way of thinking comes into play. Because you might say, look, I'd like to plant my flag around, Danish language Scrum instruction, right? Maybe that's specifically the thing, right? Your unique value proposition. And you say, great, but I'm not sure if that's the right way for me to go. Then you start to kind of experiment, right? So before you commit all into that, right? How do you launch small experiments to test that flag? Maybe you start tweeting in Danish about Scrum and see what kind of audience you can build around that when you sort of exclude non-Danish speakers, right? That's the kind of thing you work from. So that's how you would start to choose that flag. I think that's where you start.
Yeah, and then we have a follow-up question from Annika. What is the approach if someone already planted a flag in the same spot? And maybe there are many people doing the same, or already it's a crowded area.
Yes. It's inevitable that somebody's going to plant a flag where you are, right? I mean, it's very, very rare to be able to kind of have a blue ocean, if you will. If you're thinking about red ocean, blue ocean, right? That sort of metaphor. Like to be the first person somewhere today it's difficult. And if you can find it, right on. Well done there. So inevitably, there's going to be other people there. And so the question becomes, how do you differentiate yourself, right? How do you stand out? How are you going to provide unique value? So first and foremost, as I said during the presentation, no one has your story. That right there identifies you, defines you differently than somebody else, right? No one has your story, your career path, and your experience. That's the first thing. And I would highlight that exclusively. I mean, not exclusively, I would highlight that a lot, because if your field is crowded, where you're planting your flag is crowded, your story should help you stand out. That's number one. And the second is I would really start to think about, okay, well, what's going to make me different than everybody else, right, in my field, right? Is it going to be the fact that, I've got experience in the medical industry, for example, right? I've got experience in healthcare and applying my expertise in healthcare, so I'm going to specialize in this way, or I'm going to build on that foundation and take the learnings that I've had from healthcare and expand that to something else. So really thinking through not just your unique value proposition, but your experience and what you see as potential commodities in your space today, right? And how are you going to do it better? And then again, you don't have to commit to that right away, right? But it's you can float experiments, you can try different experiments to see whether that differentiation resonates or not.
And maybe also from your own experience and also from my experience, it will not be an easy path. There'll be setbacks, there'll be challenging situations. You need to be persistent.
Correct. Yeah. Look, I mean, I was 35 when I started this. And to be clear, I'd taken a very traditional path up until that point. And it took me, it took 5 years from the day that I decided to do that to publishing my first book. Right. And I told you it was a brutal process, and I learned, but it's to me, it's being candid about that. Right. There's an anti-pattern in the design world called ta-da design. Right. Ta-da design is when you go hide in a room somewhere behind your big monitor for a while and you design something, and then you come out and you say, ta-da, right? I did this. right? And everybody's like, okay, that's cool, or it's not cool, I don't understand, but nobody understands how you got there, right? To me, I think one of my unique value propositions is that I tell people how I got there as I'm getting there, right? And so I think that helps people stand out. And it's not all beautiful. It's a lot of mess in there.
Yeah, great. So we have already 14 questions in queue, and people are using the upvote functionality, and so that's great. The next one here is from Rikke, and she's asking, teaching and speaking is not for everyone. Perhaps your previous career as a musician has given you an eager for being on stage. Maybe a few words on how to start teaching or how to make it without teaching.
Yeah, that's a spot on assessment, Rika. I am comfortable on stage because of that. But to be fair, I was the side man. I was the piano player. I wasn't the singer in the front. But nevertheless, yes, being on stage has helped me. Has helped me a lot. Look, how to start teaching. It's funny, you know. They say start small. I find smaller groups far more terrifying than larger groups. I'd rather be in a room with 1,000 people where I can't actually make out an individual face than in a room with 8 people where I can see every pair of eyes. I think that's far more terrifying. But yeah, so how to start teaching? Look, I think you start teaching in safe spaces, right? So you need safe spaces to do that, to try things out. I'll tell you how I started. There is a kind of a legendary UX guy named Jared Spool. And Jared Spool, one of his many businesses is putting on conferences every year. Many years ago, he asked me, when Lean UX was starting to come up, he asked me to come and teach a workshop at his conference. And I told him, I said, listen, I don't know how to do this, right? It's one thing to say, I don't know how to write a book and figure it out over 2 years. But to teach a workshop in front of 50 people, in 3 months, that was really terrifying for me. I didn't know how to do it. And so he taught me how to do it, right? He said, okay, look, we're going to break it up into these sections. We're going to this is how much time you have to fill. This is kind of this is how I do it, right? So I think that finding a safe place to try it out, like a local meetup, or maybe even your team at work, or like maybe a brown bag lunch at work, but for people who know you, people who aren't going to, ridicule you or give you bad reviews. You want critical feedback. That's number one. So finding a safe, relatively small group of people to do that. I think certainly there's no shortage of content to read about it, but ask somebody that you admire. If you've seen somebody teach and you like their style, or if you've seen somebody present and you like how they present, reach out to them. Tell them that you like that. Flattery will get you everywhere. Let's be clear, right? And say, look, what are your top tips? Like, maybe you could ask for tips. You can ask for mentorship. You can ask for resources. But I think really finding somebody to kind of help you through that first or second time is awesome. Again, I do a lot of teaching and a lot of writing with Josh Steiden to this day. In fact, I just finished teaching a class with Josh 30 minutes ago. And the reason why I do that is because I learn a lot from him, and we're always learning from each other. So finding a partner that you get along with well also helps a lot. And your second question is how to make it without teaching. I think you can do it without explicitly teaching. I just think that if you're going to be sharing ideas publicly, regardless of channel, you're teaching, right? Maybe you're not in front of a class, but you're recording a podcast, you're recording a video, right? You are teaching somebody something. And so I think if you're going to build any kind of platform around yourself, anything you put out there is teaching in some way or another.
Yeah. I think it's the same way that I started teaching, by doing it internally in companies with my coworkers, small systems around a specific topic. And that was 10 years ago. And also do it together with other people can give you a lot of safety, a lot of inspiration, because you can zoom in and out of the session, not being the one to be the main teacher all the time. Great.
Yeah.
So we have another question here from Kenneth. This is an amazing achievement, Jeff, but what if you don't have the ambition to conquer the world, but you still want to be forever employable? That is, can you do this in a smaller scale?
It's a great question. And look, I don't have the ambition to conquer the world. I just don't want to have a boss anymore. I think that's the difference. Look, the short answer to your question is yes. And in fact, in the book, I make it very, very clear that while this book certainly fits the model of a consultant, right, or a self-employed individual, the book also fits the model for in-house employees, right? So if you want to be forever employable and stay employed in-house, keep working inside companies, which is absolutely fine. It's awesome, right? You can absolutely do this, right? And I see people do this all the time. In fact, there have been jobs created for these people over the years that we haven't really acknowledged, right? So if you think about somebody like a Microsoft developer evangelist, right? Like, what is that person? That person's an expert about something, and their job is to go and kind of teach that stuff to other people and evangelize. I've seen people inside organizations become the source for specific pockets of knowledge because they've built that platform internally, right? They're experts in this particular thing. What I think this helps is it helps you because it makes you more valuable to the organization. I think it helps the organization because it improves their hiring brand, right? So there's this opportunity for them to say, look, the people that we hire not only are excellent at their job, but they have an opportunity to flourish more broadly. And that helps them hire better people as well. So in many cases, this is a win-win situation. And so whether you're creating your platform externally or internally inside your organization, right, you can still kind of become forever employable inside that organization. And if it doesn't end up working out inside that company, right, you can take that to the next organization and say, look, inside my last company, I built this community around these ways of working, these methods of customer centricity or collaboration. And that's something that I would also bring here, right? And I think that increases your viability as a candidate and makes you stand out as you go from one job to the next job.
A good point. So we have another question here from Jakob. Do you ever become tired of teaching consulting and miss being part of a product team? I think this is actually what Jakob is doing right now. He went into being part of a product team to build some products.
Yeah. The short answer to your question is yes. Absolutely. There are days where I really would prefer to be just on a product team, working on a product and just kind of heads down, continuously improving and making that better. So yeah, I mean, so as an answer to your question, yes, there are days like that. But the nice thing about my job is, especially lately, is that there's good variety in the work. I work on, for example, my clients today range from telecom to casual gaming to financial services, for example. And so there's a nice variety in there. And the scope of the work that I'm doing right now is bigger, and so it's more impactful. And so I really enjoy having an impact on organizations right now and really improving the ways of working inside organizations. And that's the kind of work that I'm doing today. And so I like that. So yes, I miss the product work, but the work I'm doing today is pretty interesting. So
yeah, great. So another question here from Fang. You still panic once in a while like you were after become a coach. How do you enhance your core skills while coaching so that you're still employable in 5-10 years from now?
Yeah. So I tend to panic every November, roughly, because everything goes very, very quiet in November, December, mid-January. Especially now that I live in Europe, you know, it's like, it's just, there's basically December and January, forget about it, like nothing happens, right? And so, yeah, so it comes every November I start to panic. I'm like, this is it. That was my last job. No one's ever going to hire me again, you know? And then of course it gets quiet, December, January. I was like, okay, I got to figure something out. Maybe go do product work, you know, figure it out. So yes, the panic still comes. And I enhance my skills through at least two different ways. So first is through the work, right? So the work itself, the different client work is challenging and it's different. And I throw myself, again, this is me building on my previous self-confidence. And between you, me, and the recording of this, I throw myself into situations sometimes that I believe are a little bit over my head. They're stretches, right? And so somebody says, hey, can you do this? Like, sure, I can do that. I've never done it before, but I'll figure it out, right? And so to me, that's part of it. And if I get it right, and sometimes I don't get it right, and sometimes that goes poorly, but if I get it right, I've learned a new skill, right? So that's number one. There's three things. Second is collaboration. I collaborate with people who I respect, who I admire, and frankly, people I can learn from, people who know things that I don't know. And that's everybody, right? Everybody's got different experiences. And so I do a lot of collaborations and I learn that way. And third is reading and engagement in the community, right? So just keeping up to date on the latest conversations. If there's an interesting book, I don't read all the books, but I try to get to the ones that I believe are meaningful or impactful and read and try to grow and move that forward. So yeah, I'm always thinking about how to be employable in 5 or 10 years. And that's part of that reinvention, right? So at the beginning of the talk, I talked about reinvention and how we're moving into HR and maybe finance and legal, right? To me, that's part of it as well. It's kind of thinking about, okay, right? Agile tech is saturated, right? Agile design and product is saturated. I've still got a foothold there and I've still got a good conversation, but what else do we need to succeed? Well, there's HR, there's legal, there's finance, right? That's where I'm pushing into. So all of those things help me feel more confident in November when the work dies down so that it'll pick back up in February.
So you can have a relaxing Christmas time and
yeah, exactly.
not getting too stressed. I had the same feeling when I started to work in my own company. The first number of years, will this actually be sustainable? But also I take a lot of classes myself, 10, 15 days every year. Actually, I consider taking the live online class, the product discovery, but this is also something that you're doing.
Yep.
So let's look at it now. Questions start to be upvoted and changing. That's great. So one from Jakob, looking retrospectively, would you have progressed in a different order than you ended up following?
Would I have done it differently? You know, it's interesting. I look back in my career. One of the things that I don't really talk about in the talk, but it's in the book, is you know, lean UX. Like I would not have done it without something to say. Like I really, you know, like for me, and I would have found it one way or another, right, if it wasn't lean UX. But up until that point in my career, and remember, this is about 10 years into my career at this point. So I've been working for 10 years. I kind of always missed the boat. I always showed up too late. I showed up as the .com, because I was playing music for a few years, I showed up right before the .com collapse happened. I showed up, you know, in companies after they had peaked, right? And so I always ended up showing up too late. So if there's anything I would have done differently in retrospect, is I would have timed things better. I would have tried to have better timing. But I guess ultimately, the most important thing for me was to have something important and relevant to say from my experience. And Lean UX was that. I don't know if I would have done anything differently.
So what What recommendation would the current Jeff give the younger Jeff going 5-10 backs?
I think I missed the fact that all of those places where I ended up too late were learning opportunities. Now I learned stuff there, of course, but I could have been more proactive about it. I could have been more explicit about it. And I think that's the one thing that I try to instill in the book and on my kids and everything, is that every time you try something, even if it doesn't work out, it's a learning opportunity. What did you learn from that? What did you learn from that? My kids want to punch me in the face every time I say that, because I ask them all the time, right? So I think that's the advice, is like, okay, you showed up in 1999 for your first tech job and the dot-com bubble explodes 18 months later. Great. What did you learn from that? Right. And that's the way I would do it.
Yeah, good point. So we still have a number of questions, and they're still jumping. That's great. It's one from Carly Parker. Do you ever get asked questions which make you question yourself, whether or not you are knowledgeable and expert enough in this specific subject?
Yeah.
If you do, how do you deal with these thoughts and move on?
Yeah, this is a really easy question to answer, because I do this all the time. And I think, again, this is a differentiation with me and a lot of other people who might be targeting the same opportunities as me. If I don't know something, I say it, right? I will say, I don't know. So if a client says, how do I do this? I'll say, I don't know, but I can figure it out, right? That's the difference. But I will be honest and transparent. So I get asked this all the time. Hey, do you know how to do this? Do you have experience with that? How do you know this is going to work? I don't know, right? I don't know that it's going to work. It's my guess, it's my assumption, it's my hypothesis, or I don't have any experience with this, but I can go figure it out, or I can go get some, or I can go ask somebody, right? That level of candor and humility and honesty wins most of the time, right? Because we're setting the right expectations. So yes, I get asked those questions and I answer with, I don't know, but I'll figure it out.
I think it's also easier to do when you have more experience. It can be harder to do when you are starting up and would like to have your flag, and you, at least I know I have a much more easier way to say, I don't know, or this is not something that I have any experience with now, rather than 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're always learning, right? We're always getting better.
Yeah. Yes. So one more from Jakob. How has your work changed in the light of the current lockdown, assuming a lot of events has been canceled?
You're looking at it. I live in this room. Mads was telling me before we let everybody in that he's seen this room before, right? This is it. I live in this room, basically. So everything's online, everything's remote. The good news is I've been doing a lot of that lately. It's interesting. I was getting very, very sick of travel. So in many ways, this has been a silver lining has been, it's been nice to be home for 8 weeks now in a row. This is our 7th week of lockdown here in Spain. So it's been nice to be home. I miss the crowds. I miss meeting people. I miss the live interaction. But I've been teaching online for 6 months. I've been delivering coaching and remote work for a lot longer than that. The toughest part is this because I can't make eye contact with anybody. I can't read the room. I can't tell if what I'm saying is helping, is resonating or not. I mean, you guys could be just playing Candy Crush, right? For all I know, right? And so I hope you're not, but I mean, again, I can't, that's the part that's hard about this is connecting and maintaining that human connection, right? The eye contact, like right now I'm looking at Mads, but I'm not looking at my camera. Now I'm looking at my camera, right? It's weird. And so, but there's no travel. And so I've converted as much as I can to remote work. Since everybody's distributed anyway, we have to live this way. It's not it's not that weird for people anymore. And the best part of this, and I know I keep finding silver linings in what is a fairly awful situation for a lot of people, is that I believe we have taken a significant leap forward in time when it comes to ways of working. Like at this point, distributed work is okay with everybody, right? Because it's the only way that we're doing work right now. To get everybody to be okay with distributed work, I think we jumped 5 years, maybe 10 years into the future.
Yeah, agreed.
That, right? Overnight.
Great. So we have one from Roberto. Do you have practical tips on how to collect and action on feedback?
I mean, feedback on the work that we do. So for example, for example, I've got the form that I shared with you in the chat, right? That form is going to ask you for some feedback. So I collect that, I read that, I pay attention to what you say, and I try to move forward. You know, I can notice attendance over the course of events, right? That tells me what's resonating, what's not, when an event is too long. I do customer discovery. I go talk to the people that I'm working with or working for to try to understand what would be helpful, what's been helpful, how to make things better. You know, I think beyond that, look, the trick is to implement it, right? I run a ton of experiments, things like, and they start small. They start small with tweets. If tweets resonate, I'll write something a little bit longer. If that resonates, maybe I'll write an article about it. Maybe I'll do a presentation about it, right? So it's all about what kind of feedback I get from these various sources, and then taking it to heart. The trick is to maintain your vision, right? You don't want to iterate from that feedback to the point where you've abandoned what you set out to do in the first place. The trick is to maintain your vision and take that feedback and adjust your tactics based on that feedback to achieve your goal.
Yes, great. Then we have one from Thomas. Hi Jeff, I'm currently working on some workshops products. Can you share your approach, Canvas, that can help in answering the questions I don't know to ask building workshops? Or Mads, if you have some thoughts too.
Mads, what do you think?
I think the Canvas, actually the Lean UX Canvas might be helpful. Just finding out what kind of challenge, what kind of issue those products, those workshops are actually targeting. Might be.
Yeah. I've definitely seen workshops about workshops. I can't recall where, but I think there's stuff like that out there. I don't know. I'm thinking if there's any specific Canvas about building workshops. I don't know. See, I told you I'd tell you I don't know, right? And so the answer to your question is I don't know of any good resources, but I'm confident they exist.
Maybe this is also more about, not about how to build the workshop, but what kind of elements, who are we actually focusing on here? What kind of challenges should this help the participants? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I guarantee it's out there. And if it's not, that's your flag, Thomas. Plant that flag, own that space, make it big.
Yeah, Thomas is already doing community work and have meetups, etc., and Scrum Master Clinic and so on. Otherwise, Thomas, then contact me and we can have a chat about it. Yeah. So let's take the next one.
Okay.
Or if you have some more on this.
No, that's all I got.
Oh, good. From Klaus, could you approach your career move as a lean startup, like doing experiments and test those before settling on a content space that resonates with an audience? Or do you just need to follow the energy, since I guess you cannot do something that you are not comfortable in?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, spot on. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. And it forms a lot of the basis of the book. I keep reaching over here because this is the only copy of the book that exists. It's a test copy. You can see it says not for resale, but it actually, it's a proof, and I'm having a couple tweaks made to it. But that's exactly what's in the book. This is about having a sense of where you'd like to go, a strategic direction, and then experimenting to see if you can build traction in that particular direction. And then using those experiments to kill your hypotheses, pivot on your hypotheses, or ultimately persevere and build and scale something. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. This is exactly like that. It's applying that kind of a build, measure, learn loop to ideas that you have about how you'd like to progress your career.
Great. And what is the little bit longer answer?
Here.
Yeah, read the
book. Read the book is the longer answer. No, but that's it. I mean, it's as a yes or no question, the answer is yes. That's exactly right.
Yeah, great. We have a question from Lisbeth. This is about you. What is your next improvement of your career? Yeah,
so this is it, right? So this is really interesting. So this is uncomfortable for me. This book is semi-autobiographical. I'm writing about myself. It starts on the day I turned 35, as I talked to you about earlier. But this is it. This is taking the stuff that I've been using, and I'm not stopping the product work or the agile work or the design work or any of that stuff that I've been doing, but I'm trying to scale and continuously improve and move towards this forever employable aspect of things, right? So how do I start to expand the conversation to personal development and career growth, right? To me, that's really valuable, and I think it's important, and that is the thing that I'm working on. That's why we're having this conversation, and it's been really, really interesting and challenging for me because it's personal. It's personal for me. I'm telling my story. I'm telling about the good things, the tough things, and it's personal for people because this is about their livelihood. This is about their families. This is about their comfort levels. And this is not something I'm particularly familiar with yet, at least not in a public setting. And so I'm learning a lot about that. And I'm genuinely and pleasantly surprised at how well the conversation has been received so far. And so this is it. This is the next step.
Great. And maybe the next question you could also read about in the answer in the book. But this is Klaus asking, what was your worst experience, failure, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I get asked this a lot. And there's, and I don't know if you're asking Klaus about sort of work experiences or life experiences. But I'll tell you this, I have been phenomenally lucky and privileged in my life in that while there's certainly been lots of ups and downs, there have never been any extreme downs, right? And some decent highs, but never anything tragic or like really a worst experience or a failure. There have been situations I've struggled through and points in time where I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but nothing terrible. So like I feel guilty even sharing what those things would be because they don't sound that bad. And so, it's been stuff like, my company's reorganizing, I'm getting laid off, or, if I get laid off, am I going to find another job? Or really, that circus story I told you about when I was 22, I learned a lot from those 6 months. I was miserable for those 6 months, really miserable. I mean, I was pretty down. I was 22. I was down about my career, what I was going to do next, where I was going. I was in the circus hanging out with elephants, which was cool for like a week. And then elephants get old after a while. And I learned a ton. I learned a lot about self-confidence. I learned about perseverance. I learned about diversity. Frankly, I grew up again in kind of a very privileged sort of setting, and the circus was a very diverse place. I learned a lot about diversity. I learned tons from that, and I incorporate that in everything that I do today.
Yeah. I guess there'll be some stories in the book also about the ups and downs and
Some, yeah, some for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
One question from Daniel. How did you find your why? I suppose that you need to have your why before you accelerate like you did.
Yeah. So look, I made the decision to go looking for it the day I turned 35, right? So that was the decision, was I need to go find the why. I discovered it by doing my job, which was director of user experience at the Ladders. My job was to build a product design team in an organization that was transitioning from waterfall to agile. My job was not only to build that team, but to build a design team that would thrive in that new environment. And this is in 2008, 2009. And there are very, very, very few good answers to that challenge in 2008 and 2009, right? The only thing really that was out there was Lynn Miller and Desiree C's paper about staggered sprints, right? That's really it. That's all there was. And so I was doing my job solving this problem, not by myself, with my team and with others outside, Josh Seiden, who I met through this, and a bunch of other folks, Janice Frazier, Ian McFarland, Alan Cooper was part of this discussion. And it dawned on me that there was lots here. And it dawned on me because as we were starting to figure out, or to try some things and to figure them out, I was sharing them, I was writing about it. And it was resonating. It was driving inbound conversation. And to me, that was clearly the why that I've been searching for a year or two at that point.
Great.
Yeah.
So next question here. Where do you get experiences to talk about in your books when you work as a consultant? And I assume a lot of it cannot be talked about.
Yeah, so it varies. So it's look, all of my experience since 2012 is consulting experience, right? So I started a company in 2012, but it was a consulting company. But the last job I had in-house was the Ladders, and it ended in January of 2012, right? So all that experience is consulting experience. I ask the clients if I can use their name. And sometimes they say yes, and a lot of the times they say no. And this is a problem. And so you end up saying things like, one time I worked with a large financial institution, right? Or this other time when I worked with this online gaming company, right? And so you talk about it that way, and that is that's the way, to get around it, anonymize it. But I always ask first, and I hope to get a yes. And it's hit or miss, right? Because look, not all these projects went really well. Not all of them were successes, right? And so I've had situations in the past where a client has said yes, but then what I wrote had to go through their corporate communications people. And by the time I got it back, I didn't recognize it. It's like, I'm not publishing this. And so I'll tend to anonymize if I can't speak freely about a named client, but I'll anonymize. And since we're all under NDA, you don't know who it is, right? So unless there's only one of those things, like I was working with a large search engine provider, right? Like I'd say stuff like that, right? Like, this electric car manufacturer based in California, right? Like, as long as it's not stuff like that, generally speaking, I can anonymize it enough to where you could probably guess it, but I'm not going to tell you. So,
yeah, I do the same. I have a lot of cases that I cannot talk about, so I anonymize, and maybe it will be between 5 or 10 different companies. If this big bank in Denmark or whatever. So the next question here from Klaus. I assume you heard of Gary, what's his last name? How to pronounce it? Vaynerchuk saying, document, don't create. I think this resonates perfectly with what you're saying. Your thoughts on this?
So I've heard of Gary, obviously. He's from New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey, so that's always easy. I don't know what he meant by document, don't create, because I don't think I've seen that. So I'm not familiar with that. If you could maybe type something in the chat to clarify that. But look, I mean, Gary's a master at this, right? I mean, he took his family's wine business online and then built a platform around that, and then built a marketing company and platform and publishing business around that, right? So he's, love him or hate him, and not everybody loves him. And, you know, it's hard to deny that he's been amazingly successful at this, right? And he'll tell, I've seen a few of his talks. He'll tell you himself that he made YouTube videos about his wine business for a year, and, you know, was screaming into the void for a year because nobody watched any of it. And then eventually people watched. So I don't know that particular phrase though, so I can't react to it directly. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so Klaus, if you want some more, then you can write in the Q&A as a comment, or in the chat. So let's take to the next one from Daniel. When did you realize that Lean UX was a full-time gig and not just a thing on the side?
Great question. For me, it was basically early 2012. So in January 2012, I was doing so much moonlighting, so many little projects on the side, like you're saying, that it was affecting my day job. And so that's when I quit my day job, and we launched a services business with Josh and another guy named Gift Constable. And so at that point, it was impacting my day job. I was doing nothing but working all day and all night between my day job and these side gigs. And so I was traveling to give talks. It was starting to piss off my bosses because I wasn't in the office. And so, so that's when, and it's roughly ends up being about 9 months after the book comes out. So yeah, and that's, as a fundamental shift. It was terrifying. I didn't have a big safety net or anything, and just did it, hoped for the best, and ended up working out.
Great. So we got some more information from Klaus.
Okay.
Instead of creating a perfect content that is based on a lot of work, you should document the process, which in sense will provide the same result, but give the audience insight into how you reach the result, but also a lot more content instead of only the result. So document the process along with the result, not only the result. Yes,
yeah, exactly. So this is, when I talked about ta-da design before, that's the opposite of this, which is exactly right. Right. And I teach this with the teams that I work with today. It's the same thing. I say, if you and like the team and I disappear into a war room for 3 months, and then we come out and we're like, hey, we're lean, we're agile, we're design thinking, we're customer centric, right? Product thinking. Everybody's going to be like, BS. Like, you guys are, I don't buy it. Right. But if you document the process along the way, if you show your work, if you share your feedback, if you share what worked and what didn't work, it's far, far more believable, and you're taking people along with you on that journey, right? You're telling that story as it happens in real time, and people love that, right? They love seeing the whole thing form and take place. So yes, absolutely agree with this 100%.
Yeah, great. And thanks, Klaus, for some more detail on this one. We just have 2 questions left, and we are still within the allocated time box of 1.5 hours. That's
amazing.
Yeah. So we have one from Annika. Any tips on how to get traction on your ideas and your take on the subject? Any tip on how to get attention for an article or blog post?
Yeah. Here's my tip. Declare something dead. or declare something not a thing. I'm not really joking, right? Like it's like one of the most read pieces I've ever written is called "There is no such thing as UX strategy," right? That's it. It's dead, right? It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. Oh man, does that piss people off, right? And pissed people will come read your stuff, or they'll come see what you're talking about, right? Because there's books out there about UX strategy. There's conferences out there about UX strategy, right? There's a whole industry around UX strategy. And so I published a thing called There's No Such Thing as UX Strategy. Oh my God, it's the end of the world, right? So it's clickbaity. Yes, it's clickbait. I know, right? But you've got to stand out. You've got to resonate, right? So look, so declare a thing not a thing, or declare it dead. That's one thing. The other thing I think I do pretty well with subject lines are the key, right? Subject lines are the key. And there's a couple other thoughts here. Subject lines that address the problem directly and quickly, right? So a subject line like, you can't be agile without human resources. Here's 3 ways to include them in the process, right? So that addresses the problem right away. And if you have that problem, you're going to click through, right? And if I promise you 3 specific things to fix the problem, you then deliver 3 very tactical things, right? So writing good headlines like that goes a long way. The other thing I've learned, and I don't know why this is, maybe it's because human beings, generally speaking, are visual people, but include some kind of visual in the article. Any kind of visual. It doesn't even have to be a good visual. It could be a crappy visual. For some reason, people will share it. They will publish it. They will ask to use it. And it could be just a crappy Venn diagram you made up on the fly, right? Add a visualize something in the article and put it in there. It just makes, it makes a tremendous amount of difference. So those are super tactical answers to your question, but that's what works for me. So just try to rise above the noise.
Great. So Annika, we're looking forward to some interesting articles with subject lines, clickbait subject lines, and some visuals.
Visuals, always,
yes.
Yeah.
And we have the last question. And Faust, I have a book for you next time we meet. I actually, in the chat, promised a book to Jonas as the one to ask the first question. And now this will be the last one. So I also have a book for you next time we meet. So what kind of hardship did you face, and how did you keep yourself motivated to continue your path?
Yeah, so look, I kind of answered the first half of this a little bit earlier, right? Which is, I don't really feel like I faced tremendous hardships, right? I've been very, very fortunate and very lucky. But the motivation for me is my family, right? So I've been married for 20 years. My daughters, you saw them at the beginning of the presentation. They're a lot bigger now. They're teenagers. And my motivation is my family, their comfort, their life, their enjoyment, their peace of mind. And so that's what motivates me to keep doing this and to keep pushing and to keep expanding and reinventing, not conquering the world, but just ensuring that we're comfortable, that we don't have to worry too much about basic life necessities, that there's a safety net in case of a pandemic, for example, that type of thing. And for me, that's what motivates me to keep going is my family, really. That's it. Yes, I've got some ambition and I've got some drive. I'm not going to deny that, right? That's absolutely part of it. But you know, that's what keeps me going.
Great. I think this is also a good way to end this this webinar. And we still have 70 people listening, so that's amazing. That's great. That's amazing.
It's good retention rate. I'll write that down as my outcome, my KR for my OKR. Yeah.
So thank you, Jeff, and thank you for your time here. And I'm really looking forward to read your book. I think it could help me. It had helped me a lot 7-8 years ago when I started to have my own business and doing a lot of teaching and workshops and etc. I will make this webinar available online in a couple of weeks.
Perfect.
But then go to this link that Jeff again posted in the chat to get your potentially book copy. I think you will draw a couple of books.
Yeah, we'll pick 2 winners. Yeah, we'll pick 2 winners from everybody who fills out the form. And thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Any questions at all? Oh, I forgot to put my email address here. Not that hard to find, but if you have any questions at all, just drop me a note as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Cool. And take
care. Thanks so much.
See you maybe in Copenhagen.
I can't wait. See you soon.
See you.